one more time. Okay, let's go inside really quick. So, as you can see, narrow angle, it's inside, no problem, height overboard. This is stuff we talked about. Again, narrow angle, but something really important. Some of you are not tracking your sights, you're not so accountable, and so I think the camera, you can come here, you can see it a little bit better, I think. So, if you go a little bit back there, you can see it? Cool. So, some of you were here trying to make that shot. You have a very narrow field of view or narrow window of opportunity to actually make that shot. We talked about it, it's very narrow, so I have to control my recoil properly and track my sights. Eventually, some of you started to graze the threshold. We talked about the ballistical aspect, the differences between here to there, what we can tolerate, what works in our advantage or disadvantage, especially from a threat perspective, right? And I just want to highlight something. We had here a couple of situations where your rounds consistently grazed the threshold. You shoot fast. You try to work with the recoil, and eventually, because the hips go to the wall, and I have that recoil management issue, you start to scratch the wall. Eventually, shots are landing on that wall here, on the threshold. So this is really interesting. 9mm, what I can see from this one, definitely, is out the projectile was deflected. Again, we talked about deflection versus ricochet, if you remember, right? We can see definitely it's inside. Also, eventually, we can see 5.56 here. Okay, I'll just demonstrate it pretty quick. All right, everything was deflected from there, came here, and we also have some shots that went directly. This one, for example, is really questionable. I'm not so sure which one of you bastards was the one doing that, what we talked about. Anyway, something interesting. First of all, if we look around, most of those shots that were close for this part of the frame flew inside. What is interesting is that those runs were deflected. And again, if we look here on the target, the visible target space area that you could see from outside was obviously the paper and the circles that I demonstrated before. But what's interesting is that while this area you can't see from outside, some of those rounds deflected here. This is interesting. This, well, data helps us to raise some questions. What if it's from, the threat perspective? What if we shoot into the room very fast, but we hit something and there is a civilian over there, to the right side of the threat? Maybe it works in our advantage in some cases. I don't know, we'll talk about it later. Now, what is also interesting, I find, is that if I move that wall a little bit, and I think that was from before, is that again we had rounds coming here directly, and that was 5.56. I already checked from the inside. That was a 5.56, and this were the 9mm that didn't went through. This wall is hollow inside. Again, I remind you what we talked about, the presentations over there. Yeah, the pictures you saw, all of this ballistics that we discussed. It's interesting, it didn't went through. We also see that the wood has a very distinct characteristics when it comes down to the deflection or ricochet. Also, another thing worth mentioning is that again, this facility is absolutely great. I have a speculation that sometimes in an open shooting range, where we don't have like proper walls, whatever, there are a lot of shots. Again, when we talk about barricade shooting, whatever, there are a lot of shots that go somewhere and people are not aware about it. Here, it's 100% safe environment. The walls are ballistic. I have there also a really nice ballistic catches. Obviously, all of you saw already. So again, this is really important because a part of the training is exactly this. I need to know what happens around me. Should I fail to do things properly, or I do things properly because I have to, but there is a certain consequence for that. 9mm, 5.56, little stuff we talked about, it needs to be understood. So again, just think about it. Again, in the military, they're not talking a lot about it. In the military, they talk a lot about 90 degrees, but they don't talk about contextual ballistics. Because that's what it's all about, right? Okay, let's continue.